Welcome back to another episode of The Road Chose Me. My name's Dan Grech, and today a topic that tons of people have asked me about, and that is, what about overlanding with your family? You've got a partner, you've got kids, and you want to hit the road, maybe up to Alaska, the Pan American Highway, maybe the whole world. How does that work? What are some of the downsides? How are some ways to mitigate it? And do people enjoy it and have a whole lot of fun? Spoiler alert, yes, they really do. So if you want to learn more about driving around the world with your family, stick around, we'll get into the details right now. Before we go any further, I want to make it clear that no, I don't have any first-hand experience in this one. Obviously, I don't have any kids, so I can't tell you from personal experience what it's like to drive around the world with kids. What I can do though, is I can tell you about the people I've met along the way and what they've told me. And if you want to learn more, I hope this video can give you an overview, but realistically what you need to do is seek out other people that have done it. And there's a few different ways you can do that. I just had a look, there's quite a few overlanding groups now. There's traveling the world with families, there's homeschooling on the road, and there's global overlanding with kids. And so those are all Facebook groups of people that are actually out there doing it or have done it in the past. Things like Drive the Pan American or roam around Europe for a year. So those people have real life experience, and I'm sure if you have a very specific question, I bet you can ask them and they'll help you out. The other way is always the best way, and that is just bumping into people as you go. And you'll be surprised once you actually get on the road how many people you meet who are out there doing the same thing as you. And I know for a fact that people with families, they try really hard to meet up with other people with families so their kids can have a social life, so they can interact. And so if you get out there and you're on the road with kids, you'll start meeting other families and they'll hook you up with other families who are nearby. And soon enough, you'll have this big community of people who are kind of roaming at the same pace. So those are a couple of ways you can reach out to real people. The first consideration is probably what vehicle will you use? And obviously you're just going to need enough physical space to bring all of the people and all of the gear, which just gets more complicated by the time you need more clothing, more actual seats in the vehicle while you're driving. And I've seen people achieve this in many different ways. One family that I bumped into driving West Africa, they had two young kids and they were just in a regular size 4x4, pretty much like my Jeep. And so the interior was very much stock with a normal back seat. So the two kids were in the back, the two parents in the front, and then the rear section was just completely full of clothing and camping equipment and gear. And on the roof, they just had a really big rooftop tent that all four of them slept in at night. And they said that worked really well because the kids were quite young, so that worked great. Another thing I've seen, the Bell family from South Africa, they had a big Defender 130 pickup, and for a long time when their kids were about teenagers, they had two rooftop tents on the roof of that thing. So one was for mum and dad and one was for the kids. And I know that worked really well, but these days I guess their kids kind of outgrew that, and some of the kids I don't think come with them anymore. And so now they actually have a huge big box camper and everybody sleeps inside, and I know they're happy with that as well. Another really workable solution is mum and dad on the roof in a rooftop tent and kids on the ground in their own tent. And you know, kids love camping, so if you give them their own space in their own tent, they're going to have a lot of fun and they're going to enjoy the trip instead of feeling like, you know, they're stuck with mum and dad the whole time. Another consideration is, what about schooling for your kids? And this is obviously going to depend on how old your kids are and how long your trip is going for. And so families that I've met on the road have dealt with this a couple of different ways. If your kids are young enough, obviously it's before school, and so it doesn't even matter. That was true of the family that drove down West Africa. Whereas other people that I've met on the road, their kids are in elementary school, maybe even early in high school, and they decided to take them out of school for an entire year and homeschool them on the road. And everyone that I've ever met doing that says that it works really, really well. And what most people I found do is they do a day of travel and then they do a rest day. And during their rest day, they make sure they do enough homeschooling to keep up with the curriculum. And it was always really fascinating to hear them say, you know, regular school is probably 80% babysitting. You know, the kids are playing, the kids have got recess and lunch and all that kind of stuff. It's probably only about 20% actual classroom material to keep up with the curriculum. So for homeschooling, they said if you did an hour a day, that was actually plenty and not hard. And they also turned it into games while they were in the car as well. You know, if the curriculum was you had to learn how to read a clock that week, then they did that while they were in the car. You know, bring along a big analog clock and move the hands around and what time is it now? And, you know, one parent can be doing that while the other parent is driving. So there's creative ways to solve the homeschooling situation and people enjoy it and have a really good time. And the best example I saw of that, a French family who were driving the Pan American, they were in this compact little camper thing and we met up when I was in Colombia. And I remember we were sitting on the street in Colombia, the kids were running around talking to other kids. They actually spoke better Spanish than I did, even though they were only about 7 or 8 years old. And the kids actually ran off and ordered us pizza for dinner from a local restaurant while we sat there. You know, mum and dad just kind of kept an eye on them, but it was totally fine. They were having a great time. And later on, I talked to the kids about it and I said, like, you know, are you guys enjoying the trip? And of course they were loving it. I said, do you enjoy homeschooling? And they both looked pretty glum and they said, no, we don't like homeschooling. They said, we like world schooling. And it was such a moment for me to realize these kids are getting to see the world and learn about the world while they're doing it, instead of just sitting back at school and reading from a textbook. So it was amazing, you know, they're not just learning about Machu Picchu and the ancient Incas, they actually got to go to Machu Picchu. So in terms of, you know, did they learn that part of the curriculum? I think it's pretty safe to say they did. In terms of learning a foreign language, no problem at all. Mum and dad even said they were involving the kids in calculations for like distances and gas mileage and how much food and water would they need and things like that, because that would help with all of their counting skills and numbers and days of the week and calendars and planning. They said it actually was really easy to work all of that into day-to-day life. So it didn't even really feel like school. And the kids aren't even aware that you say, okay, now it's time to sit down and learn and we have to do this and this. It's like, oh no, we're going to go for a drive into the mountains, but we're not sure how much gas and water we need to take. Let's look at the map and calculate the distance. Let's calculate how much gas our vehicle uses and, you know, so on and so forth. Turn it into an adventure, which is actually the learning, instead of let's sit down and learn from a textbook. Another really big thing that needs to be considered that lots of people tell me about, and that is social interaction for your kids. And I think this is a difficult one that people tell me about. And a lot of people assume that your kids might be able to just interact with local kids as you're moving along and, you know, they'll make friends. But I think it's really difficult, partly because there's a very big language barrier there, but there's also a really enormous cultural barrier. You know, when we're overlanding, we do stick out when we're in foreign countries. We speak different languages, we have different clothing, we drive these big vehicles. So when we show up in a village, the local kids aren't going to look at your kids like they're equals or like they're friends. They're kind of going to be a bit skeptical and maybe a bit standoffish. And so I think that does become difficult, in that your kids probably will really only get to socialize with you as parents. So it's hard for them to socialize with kids of their own age. And again, lots of people told me they solved this problem by teaming up with other overlanders and making sure they met other families on the road, and then maybe even traveling in convoy with them for a month or two. And they said that was amazing, because as soon as they parked up the cars, the kids from both families would just entertain themselves for hours and hours, whether they're in a campsite or whether they're in a wild camp, while the parents could, you know, drink a bottle of wine and cook dinner and have adult time. So they loved it and the kids loved it. So that's a win-win. Another topic that comes up all the time is people ask about safety. They wonder if you're going to be putting your family at risk by, you know, traveling through Latin America with your kids. And what I've heard is, in fact, the exact opposite is true. Tons of people in Latin America, they have kids at a young age. And so lots of people have kids. And what that means is they'll relate better to you as a family than they can relate to me as a single guy in my late 30s. Lots and lots of military and guys on the side of the road, they're happy to hold me up. They're happy to kind of pressure me for some extortion money and, you know, give me a hard time at the borders, because I'm just a single guy and that's not really frowned upon. But if you're there and you're a mum and a dad and you've got kids, they don't want to mess with that family unit. In their society, that's not a good thing to do. And I've had many people tell me that when they're in a bribery situation, they'll often send one of the kids over to grab dad's leg and say, "Oh, daddy, can we please leave now?" And then you can immediately see the military guys soften up and they're like, "Oh, it's okay, you guys can get on your way." Same thing at border crossings. People have told me, carry one of your kids with you while you're doing all your paperwork. And immediately people will be like, "Oh, wow, you have kids? Oh, okay, here, we'll help. We'll get you your stamp, get your signature. Okay, you guys can keep moving so you don't have to hang out in this hot, dusty border town all day with your kids." So in a funny sense, people are going to treat you, or they're going to relate to you better because you have kids than if you're just a single person. So from a safety perspective, ironically, I actually think you're safer when you have kids than when you don't have kids. People have sometimes asked me about budgeting as well when you have kids. And in a funny sense, your budget doesn't go up much at all. The most expensive things when you're on the road, no doubt about it, are gas, followed probably by food and accommodation, and everything else is almost irrelevant. And obviously with kids in the car, you're not spending any more on gas. Accommodation in nearly every country I've been to is just like per space, you know, $5 a night for whatever happens to be in your vehicle. They don't really care that much. And certainly for food, kids aren't eating an enormous amount of food. So adding, you know, an extra few dollars a day from vegetables and the odd piece of meat, it's not going to break your budget. So traveling with your kids doesn't actually add much money at all compared to if you were just a couple. Once again, I hope that video has been helpful, and I hope it makes you realize that yes, you really can get out and explore the world with your family, with your kids, and everyone's going to have a great time. Absolutely, it is more work, it is an extra complication, but hey, that's what overlanding is about. That's what having a family is about. It's more work, but without a doubt, it's more reward. So don't think you can't do it just because you have kids. There are thousands of people out there doing it. So if the video has been helpful, please do hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. As always, new videos come out every Monday and Thursday, teaching you what you need to know to get out and have your own grand adventure around the world. So until next time, stay safe out there, and maybe I'll bump into you on the road.